It started with the usual calm of an ordinary day. I had just finished my morning coffee, the familiar smell of roasted beans filling the apartment. My wife, Lisa, was still in the bedroom, humming softly as she got ready for our honeymoon. We'd been planning this trip for months, our escape from the daily grind, a fresh start. I was excited, yet there was something unsettling that I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way Lisa kept looking at her phone, more secretive than usual, or the way she'd suddenly become anxious whenever I lingered near her. We'd been together for 3 years, and she swore up and down that she loved me. She'd even said she'd never do anything to hurt me. I believed her, at least until that morning. Just as I was about to head out the door, I decided to check something in our bedroom, just a quick glance, nothing more. My curiosity got the better of me, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to make sure everything was in order. That was when I saw them. My heart hammered in my chest as I pushed open the door, and everything around me seemed to slow down. There they were, Lisa and her brother, Mark, completely tangled up on our bed. His hands were under her shirt and her face was buried in his neck. Their bodies pressed together so intimately it made my stomach churn. I froze in the doorway, caught in a web of shock, betrayal, and disbelief. My mind went blank for a few seconds. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Lisa looked up, her face a mixture of surprise and guilt, but Mark's expression was unreadable, almost smug. No words came out, just the sickening realization that my wife, the woman I trusted, had been sleeping with someone who was just anyone, her own brother. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My palms turned clammy and the room suddenly felt hotter. My eyes flicked to the pillow where I saw a small, crumpled piece of fabric, her favorite silk scarf, clutched in her hand. It was proof that they'd been planning this, hiding something behind my back. I saw her lipstick smudged on his shirt collar, a stark, vivid red that burned into my memory. "Lisa, what the hell?" My voice broke, barely a whisper. I could feel my throat tighten. "You swore you loved me. How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down, her eyes shimmering with tears. Mark sat up, stretching like he was just waking from a nap, but the smugness never left his face. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stand there, trembling, trying to process the scene before me. The worst part, the moment I realized I'd never really known her. All those nights I'd come home late from work, thinking she was just busy with her job or her friends, and she was here, sleeping with her brother. I trusted her with everything. I knew I couldn't stay in that moment. My mind raced, unlocking possibilities I refused to entertain. I had to do something. I had to plan how I'd deal with this, how I'd punish her, how I'd take back control of my life. But right then, I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that my world had shattered and I had to face it. I had to decide what next. I looked at her one last time, feeling a bitter mix of rage and heartbreak. Whatever came next, I knew I couldn't let her get away with this, not without a price. I clenched my fists, feeling the cold sweat on my palms, and slowly backed out of the room. My mind was already spinning, trying to think of how I'd get even. I had to get my affairs in order, gather the evidence, and prepare for the storm I knew was coming. As I left the apartment, I kept hearing her voice in my head, her promises, her words of love. All lies, every single one. I had no idea how I was going to face her again, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the rest of that day walking around in a fog, trying to hold myself together. My stomach was knotted, and my hands kept trembling as I replayed the scene over and over in my head. I couldn't believe she'd do this to me, behind my back with her own brother no less. It was like a sick joke, except there was nothing funny about it. Every breath I took felt heavier, like I was carrying a stone in my chest. I needed answers, and I knew I couldn't confront her right away, not without some sort of plan. The first thing I did was start digging. I needed concrete proof, something I could hold over her head if she tried to deny it. I checked her phone, no passcode as usual, and found messages that confirmed my worst fears. Flirty texts, secret rendezvous, promises to meet up after I left for work. She'd been lying to me for weeks, maybe longer. But the real kicker was the physical evidence. I found her silk scarf shoved in the laundry basket, already stained with lipstick. Her perfume, a scent I used to love, now made my stomach twist. I felt the bile rise in my throat. She'd been sneaking around behind my back and I'd been blind to it. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the evidence I'd collected. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. Revenge. That word kept echoing in my head. I'd been a good husband, loyal, caring, the kind of guy who always put his partner first. And now I was the fool, the sucker who got betrayed in the worst way possible. I looked around my apartment, realizing I did want to stay here anymore. Not alone, not now. I needed space, clarity, but I also needed leverage. While Lisa was busy denying everything or maybe trying to spin it differently, I would gather all the dirt I could. Photos, messages, witnesses if possible. I wasn't planning to just walk away. That night I started to formulate a plan. I knew her weak spot, her reputation. If I could find a way to expose her, to make her realize that betrayal had consequences, I'd be the one in control. I didn't want to make a scene in a fit of rage, but I was angry enough to burn everything down if that's what it took. I remembered her telling me she was planning a birthday dinner with her friends that weekend. Perfect. I could use that to slip in and plant some evidence, screenshots, recordings, whatever I could find, that would make her regret ever crossing me. My palms felt slick with sweat as I thought about it. I'd have to be sneaky, but I had a few tricks up my sleeve. Later that night, while she was out with her friends, I broke into her phone. I wanted to see what she might have hidden. I knew it was risky, but I was past caring. I tapped through her messages, her emails, her social media, and there it was, more proof. Flirty photos of her and Mark exchanged late at night with words that made my stomach turn. I downloaded everything, screenshot after screenshot, and made copies, just in case. As I sat there in the dark, I felt a strange coldness settle over me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about power, about reestablishing some sense of control. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me or pretend it was just a harmless affair. She crossed a line, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. By the time she returned, I'd already packed a bag. I told her I was going to stay at a friend's place for a few days to clear my head. She looked worried, maybe sensing something was wrong, but I didn't say a word. I just handed her the bag and left silently, my heart pounding. Now I was alone, planning my next move. I knew what I wanted, an eye for an eye. I wanted her to feel as betrayed as I did, and I was determined to make it happen, no matter what it took. I'd sit tight for a few days, gather everything I needed, and then spring my trap, because she needed to understand that trust was a two-way street and she'd burned that bridge. Next step, I'd find the perfect moment to confront her, expose her lies, and remind her who truly holds the power here. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog of cold calculation. I stayed away from her apartment, not out of remorse or guilt, but because I knew I had to be strategic. Every moment I was apart, I was planning my next move, gathering evidence, making sure everything was airtight. Lisa called a few times, trying to sound innocent, asking if I was okay. I didn't bother to answer. Instead, I just let her stew, knowing full well that she was probably panicking already. I used that time to get my head straight. I met with a friend who's a lawyer, someone I trust, to get advice on how to handle the situation legally if I needed to. I didn't want to go full revenge without knowing the boundaries. I was planning to cause her legal trouble, but I wanted to be prepared for anything. Having a plan in place made me feel a little more in control of the chaos my life had become. One thing was clear. I wasn't just going to confront her with my evidence. No, I needed to do this in a way that made her realize she'd lost everything. I wanted her to feel vulnerable, exposed, and helpless, not just caught. The idea was to make her see that her actions come with consequences she wouldn't be able to deny or run from. I decided I'd wait until the night of her birthday dinner with her friends. That's when I'd hit her with everything: proof, confrontational words, the whole package. I had to time it right so she'd be least prepared. And I knew she'd be at her most vulnerable, surrounded by her so-called friends, thinking she was safe. The day of her dinner arrived. I kept my phone close, ready to act. I went to a different place, somewhere I could watch her without being seen, just in case she decided to check her phone or call me. I was nervous, but more than that, I was determined. I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline like I was about to step into a war zone. She texted me that she was on her way, and I knew it was time. I had everything ready, screenshots saved on a flash drive, a recording I'd secretly made of her admitting to the affair, just in case. I slipped into my car and headed to the restaurant where she was meeting her friends, pretending I was only going for a drink with a buddy. As I parked, I saw her arrive, flustered but trying to look composed. She looked around, probably wondering where I was. I watched from a distance, heart pounding faster than I liked, waiting for the perfect moment. When she finally sat down with her friends, I approached with a calm I didn't entirely feel. My hands felt clammy, but I kept my face neutral. I slid into the seat beside her just enough to be noticed. Her eyes widened in surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. "Oh, I thought I'd join the celebration," I said, voice steady. "But I think I've got something to tell you first." I pulled out the flash drive, held it up so she could see. Her face drained of color. "What's that?" she asked, voice strained. "Evidence," I said plainly. "Of everything. Your texts, your secret meetings, the recordings. You really thought you could keep this hidden forever, huh?" Her friends looked confused, but I didn't care. I pressed play on my phone and her guilty voice filled the air, the words she'd said in her own confession, willingly or not. Her face crumpled. She started to stammer, trying to deny it, but it was too late. "Why?" I demanded, voice rising. "Why would you do this? After everything I did for you, how long has this been going on?" She looked down, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was stupid. It was a mistake." "No, Lisa," I cut her off sharply. "This isn't just a mistake, it's betrayal, and I don't think I can trust you anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Her friends looked uncomfortable, some whispering behind their hands. I felt a strange relief, mixed with the burning anger inside me. I'd made my point, and I'd shown her she couldn't hide from the truth anymore. I got up slowly, leaving her with her shame and her broken reputation. "You want to keep lying, keep hiding. That's your choice, but don't expect me to stick around. I'm done." I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her sitting there, tears blurring her vision. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It was over. The trust was gone. I'd done what I needed to do. The next step was to cut all ties permanently. But part of me wondered how much damage had really been done, and what would it take for her to understand I was done forgiving. The fallout was immediate and brutal. I knew I had to act fast, not just to seal the deal, but to make sure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. After I left that restaurant, I didn't go back to my apartment. Instead, I booked a hotel nearby where I could keep an eye on her social media and keep my plans close to the chest. I wasn't about to give her the chance to spin anything or try to manipulate the situation. Over the next few days, I stayed silent, collecting my thoughts. I watched her post on social media, her trying to pretend everything was okay, smiling with her friends, acting like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I had already received a few screenshots from her friends, curious or maybe concerned, of her drunkenly lamenting her mistakes. That was good. I wanted her to feel exposed, vulnerable. It was the only way she'd understand what she'd thrown away. One evening, I got a message from a mutual acquaintance, someone I'd trusted before but now I saw in a different light. They told me Lisa had been disappearing for hours, claiming she was meeting friends, but her stories didn't add up. She was hiding something, and I wasn't going to let her dig herself out of it. I knew she was trying to spin a story about a bad breakup or stress, but I didn't buy it. I decided it was time for the final push. I'd had enough of her pretending she was innocent or misunderstood. I wanted her to feel the real consequences of her actions. I needed her to understand that I wasn't going to be the naive fool anymore. She'd pushed me to the edge, and I was ready to push back. The plan was simple but effective. I contacted a private investigator. I found one online, discreet, professional. I explained what I needed: proof of her whereabouts, evidence of her lying, anything that could be used to make her realize I knew everything. I wanted her to see that her secrets were no longer secret. I paid for a week's worth of surveillance, just enough to catch her in the act if she slipped up again. And sure enough, it wasn't long before I got my first updates. She was sneaking out late at night, meeting someone, probably her brother, I suspected, or maybe someone else. I watched her walk into a cheap motel, her face tense, her movements hurried. The footage was crystal clear, and I felt a sick satisfaction knowing she'd been caught red-handed again. I sat in my hotel room, eyes glued to the screen, feeling the terrible mix of anger and relief. I knew what I had to do next. I had enough proof to make her regret ever crossing me. I was going to show her I held all the cards now. My plan was to confront her face to face, but with everything laid bare. The day arrived. I waited until she was supposed to be at work, then I went to her apartment. I arranged to meet her there, but this time I had a plan. I carried a folder with all the evidence, screenshots, recordings, the motel footage, and I was ready to finally make her see what she'd lost. When I knocked on her door, she opened it, surprised to see me. Her eyes widened, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. She tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "No more lies," I said, voice cold and steady. "I've seen everything, every secret, every lie. You thought you could get away with this, huh?" Her face crumpled, tears welling up. "Please, I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I was stupid. I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," I cut her off sharply. "You destroyed everything we had. All the trust, all the promises, you threw them in the trash, and now you're crying. That's rich." I pulled out the folder, opened it, and placed it on the table. "Look at this. Your late-night meetings, the motel, the texts. I've got proof of everything, and I'm done pretending that I don't see what a liar you are." Her hands trembled as she reached for the papers, trying to deny everything. But I didn't let her. I let her feel the weight of her actions. Her face turned red, and she started to sob uncontrollably. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a hollow sense of finality. "You want to keep pretending it's just a mistake? Fine," I said quietly. "But I'm walking away for good this time." I grabbed my keys, and with a final look at her broken figure, I headed for the door. Before I left, I looked her in the eye. "Don't bother calling me. Don't even try to explain. You lost me, for good." I turned the handle, pushed the door open, and stepped into the sunny street outside, leaving her behind with her shame and her ruined life. Walking away from her felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't want her anymore, not as my wife, not as anything. That chapter was over, and what I learned: trust is fragile, and once broken, it's nearly impossible to fix. But sometimes you have to burn everything down to rebuild. The only question now was, what do I do with the pieces? The days after I left her apartment were the hardest. I didn't call her, didn't see her, and honestly, I barely slept. My mind kept going over everything: the betrayal, the lies, the utter loss of trust. I felt hollow, like someone had pulled the plug on my emotions, leaving me disconnected and numb. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. That clarity told me this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about deciding what kind of person I was going to be after this. I threw myself into work, tried to drown out the chaos in my head with tasks and deadlines. But beneath that, I was still planning. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. That's when I started reaching out to some old friends, people I'd pushed aside over the years. I needed allies, someone who could understand what I was going through and maybe even help me take this further. I wasn't just looking to hurt her. I wanted to make her understand that she'd lost her chance, her place in my life, forever. I also reached out to a divorce lawyer. I wanted everything documented, everything prepared. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. I wanted to make sure she didn't get away with any manipulative tricks, any claims that I'd done something wrong. I was going to come out of this clean and in control. I'd had enough of feeling like a victim. I was going to be the one who decided the terms. The most surprising part was how much I started to feel relief, not from the pain of betrayal, but from the act of taking back control. I was finally doing something about it. No more silent suffering or pretending. I was rewriting the story, and I wasn't going to let her turn me into a fool anymore. But I knew I had one last move to make, a final act that would leave her no room to deny the truth. I planned to give her a taste of what she'd lost, publicly, definitively. I wanted her to wake up and realize that her actions had consequences, that she couldn't just destroy someone's trust and walk away unscathed. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Her birthday was coming up, an anniversary of sorts that she'd always celebrated with a big party. I decided to crash that celebration, not to cause chaos, but to make my statement. I contacted a friend who owed me a favor, someone who could infiltrate her circle without raising suspicion. I handed over all the evidence I'd collected, screenshots, recordings, even the motel footage. My plan was simple. I'd let her see that everything was out in the open, that I knew her secrets and that she couldn't hide from it. On her birthday night, I showed up unannounced. The party was in full swing, music, laughter, cluttered tables lined with drinks and food. I kept my face neutral, observing her from a distance. She saw me, her eyes flickering with shock and fear. I could see her trying to hide her anxiety, but I knew her mind was racing. I moved closer, and in front of everyone I pulled out my phone. I pressed play, and the room fell silent as her private conversations, her secret rendezvous, and her lies flooded the speakers. Her face turned pale, then red, then white. Her friends looked confused, some appalled, others just watching her crumble. "Lisa," I said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "You've been lying all along about everything, your affair, your lies. You thought you could hide it forever, didn't you?" She tried to speak, to deny it, but I held up the evidence. "I've got everything right here, and I'm done pretending I didn't see it." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "You betrayed me, and I'm not going to stay silent anymore." Her friends looked at her differently now, some disappointed, others angry. She started crying, trying to plead, but I didn't listen. I'd made my point. She was exposed, vulnerable, and helpless. I kept my gaze steady, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and disgust. This was justice, crude but effective. When I finally walked away from her, I felt the last of my anger drain out. I'd done what I needed to do. I'd shown her she lost everything she'd ever cared about, her marriage, her reputation, her sense of security. Now she was just a girl cornered by her own lies. That night, as I drove home alone, I realized I'd taken back my power. I didn't need her anymore. I'd broken the chain of trust, yes, but I had regained control. The only thing left was to move forward, to rebuild from the ashes. And surprisingly, I felt ready for that. Because if she could destroy everything, I could certainly fix myself. Next, I'd finalize the divorce, tie up loose ends, and walk away knowing I'd done everything I could. That's what real strength looked like, letting go and moving on, no matter how much it hurt. The final step was surprisingly straightforward, but it felt like crossing a finish line I'd been sprinting toward for weeks. I went to the lawyer's office, sat across from her with all the evidence laid out, proof of her betrayal, my receipts, the recordings. She listened quietly, her face drained but resigned. I made sure everything was clear: the divorce papers, the custody arrangement, the division of assets. I wanted to leave no room for her to manipulate or drag things out. When the papers were signed, I handed her the copies, watching her face flicker with a mixture of relief and regret. "Here," I said quietly, "this is the official end. No more lies, no more games." I then handed over the keys to her apartment, my way of saying she could stay or go, but I was done with her controlling my life. She looked at me, tears in her eyes, but she didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded, accepting what she'd earned. I felt, for the first time in a long while, a strange sense of closure. I had closed that chapter definitively, and even though it hurt, I knew I was stronger for it. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter, like a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. No more betrayal, no more lies, just a clean break. I knew it was the right decision. The trust was shattered beyond repair, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. Back home, I packed up what was left of my belongings, leaving her with the mess she'd created. I handed over the keys to her apartment, a symbolic act of reclaiming my life. I told her to keep whatever she wanted, but I was done. As I closed the door for the last time, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the end of a long, painful journey, but also the beginning of something new. In the quiet that followed, I sat on my favorite chair, took a deep breath, and looked around my empty apartment. I realized I'd been so blinded by love, so eager to trust, that I'd ignored all the warning signs. Now I knew better. Trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deep, but I also learned that sometimes you have to burn everything down to see clearly again. My advice: don't ignore red flags. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Trust is earned, not given blindly. And when it's broken, don't hesitate to walk away, because holding on to what's broken only drags you down. Strength isn't in forgiveness alone. Sometimes it's in knowing when to let go and rebuild from the ashes.